Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome to our weekly Friday spiritual reminders, held as a collaboration between the Ministry of Justice, Crown Prosecution Service, and Government Legal Department Muslim Networks. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hawa Shehu, and I'm the chair of the CPS Muslim Network. Before we begin, as always, can I ask everyone to please mute your microphones if you haven't already done so? And also, please do switch off your cameras, as it can be a bit distracting when we're trying to focus on the speaker and the presentation. Please only interrupt if there is an issue with the audio, and you can put something on the message feed on the chat. I will be keeping an eye on it. And please, as I said, let's have no interruptions or questions during the course of the talk. If you do have any questions or suggestions for future topics, you can share these with us via Slido. We'll put the information in the chat again, but that's sli.do, and just use the hashtag Friday Reminder. And our speaker will do her best to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the session. Just for clarification, remember again, this session isn't meant to be a replacement for the Jummah Khutbah. And now I'm excited to introduce our speaker. So for today's reminder, I'm really pleased to introduce Lady Sidra Naeem, who I can definitely say is back due to popular demand, mashallah. Lady Sidra Naeem is a public international speaker, Islamic scholar, qualified teacher, and also a Muslim chaplain in the educational, health and retail sectors. She's been honoured with many titles, including the Deputy Lord Lieutenant, the Queen's Representative for the County of Essex. She delivers lectures on many Islamic subjects, and she's been awarded and nominated for her outstanding voluntary work in the Muslim and non-Muslim communities, due to a number of successful projects that she has supported and initiated since the challenging times of 9/11. These include her training, delivering training to the police.
Okay, assalamu alaikum to the. We'll hand that back over to the sister if you want to start. Jazakallah khairan.
Okay, assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for inviting me today. I'm going to share my talk. Okay, so my talk today is on misconceptions about Islamic law on women's rights, and the reason why I am doing this talk in particular is because some aspects of the misconceptions about women's rights are actually directly linked with your jobs, you know, legal, courts, justice services, that kind of stuff. So this is a very large topic about are Muslim women being oppressed, and in what way, and is it, you know, according to Islam or not. But I have actually picked out particular parts which are relevant to your organizations. Status of women in Islam is often the target of attacks by the secular media. One of the most common myths portrayed and used as a propaganda weapon is that Muslim women are oppressed, and basically, Muslim women are not oppressed. They were oppressed before Islam came. And these are some of the things that were happening before Islam came. Baby girls were buried alive. There was sexual slavery, nudity, and persecution of women. Women were traded and married off as part of business deals. They could not inherit own land or property. They never had a say in lawmaking either. And it was actually when Islam came, after Prophet Muhammad came, that women's status and rights were given. And Islam was actually one of the first religions to allow women's rights, which had never, ever been there before. The principal difference in the way these rights came about is important. In other religions, men gave women rights, and in the West, rights became part of the law only eventually after women had been through much hardship and great political struggles, and partly due to the necessity of women working in factories during wars, just recently within the last century. Whereas in Islam, did you know that these rights were actually given by Allah through revelation 1400 years ago? They cannot be reversed even by a parliamentary decision. Now, in some countries, some of our Muslim countries, we have to remember the country may be Islamic, but that does not mean the parliament is following Islamic laws. A lot of parliaments in some of these countries are governed by the greed for land, power and money. So they may make up their own laws, which are not to do with the Quran or the Hadiths. So if a country followed the religion properly, the parliamentary laws would be in line with Islamic laws. And it's actually the same in this country. If you think of the Queen, she is actually head of the church, so she's head of the religion, but Parliament in the olden days was actually head of the church as well, but nowadays Parliament is separated from the religion. So parliamentary laws in this country does not mean that they are religious laws according to the Bible. So it's exactly the same in our countries as well. So the first one is when a baby is born. In Islam, did you know that if it is a girl, it is actually brings 2 lights and double blessings into a Muslim household, more than a boy. And this happened because before Islam came, baby girls were being buried alive. And the reason for that was that people regarded men or boys as a superior because they are the financial heads in the household and they are the ones who are going to bring the money in to family for parents when they reach old age. Don't forget, there was no social security in those days. There were no government laws that determined that when people get old, they get money from the government. So the only source of money was actually boys, who are the ones who are going to go out and earn the living, whereas girls are more regarded as homemakers and have the babies and stay at home to look after the children. So this is actually happening even really in recent times, where China was overpopulated and the Chinese government announced that only 1 child per household was allowed. And if anybody had a baby girl, they were either killed or they were exported out of the country into other countries where they were adopted. So this is actually happening in front of our eyes, you know, even while we are alive as well. Again, this is not in according to Islamic law. We're not allowed to kill girls. And in the Quran it says, and when the girl child who was buried alive is asked, upon what sin was she killed for? That is actually written in the Quran, chapter 61, verses 8 to 9. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has stated that when a boy is born, he brings 1 light, and when a girl is born, she brings 2 lights. Now, education is another very important right, regardless of what you hear in the media. So education, a Muslim woman does have the right to be educated. The very first revealed word of the Quran was actually Iqra, which means read. And that word was revealed for all of mankind, not just for men. The women are not a garment that you can just wear and undress. They have rights, and one of them is actually read. Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, also said, the seeking of knowledge is obligatory for every Muslim, male and female. That's actually in Tirmidhi. And that means that there's equal rights to education, and women are even more important that they are educated, because they are the ones who are raising up the next generation. Did you know that the first school of a child is actually the mother's arms? If a mum is educated, she is the first teacher to teach the children how to speak, and has brilliant communication skills, which are God-given traits, because they are actually genetically, you know, made really to be the nurturers for the future generation, the offspring. In some countries, like Afghanistan is one of them, there was actually laws in Parliament saying that women could not be educated, but that was man-made laws. And most of Parliament is governed by men, even nowadays. I have met Theresa May, and she actually said to me that the whole of England is actually governed more by male-driven laws than females. And she felt she was oppressed. She was only the second female prime minister in English history to be a female, and we're in the millennium years, so that could give you a clue. And a week after I met her, I remember Jeremy Corbyn then said in Parliament in front of everybody, "Sit down, you stupid old woman." So basically when he said that, that just proved to me really that what Theresa May was saying was actually correct. Some of the laws in Muslim lands say Muslim women cannot be educated. The reason is that they want to give, it's all privatized. Money, education is privatized in our homelands, and priority is given to the men because they are the ones then to go out and earn the living. They are the ones who are supposed to be the financial supporters in Islam, which is a good thing really for women. It actually elevates women because they don't need to work, but they can work, which I'll come to in a minute. And if they earn their money, they can keep their own money. It's not obliged to them that they have to spend that to the rest of the family. Whereas for men, that is their main role. And also, men don't want women getting into Parliament. They don't want them to get educated. They don't want them to learn about all the rights that women have got, because if they learn about those rights, it will make women more powerful and they may take over Parliament. So there's so many different reasons why that happened. But I just wanted to make it clear, it's not written anywhere in the religion that education is not allowed for women. In fact, did you know that was actually a Muslim woman who opened the very first university? The fight for education for women saw the emergence of the first university for women in America in 1821. In 1841, women were formally allowed to teach in universities. But did you know that in Islam, it was actually in 841, there was a princess called Fatima al-Firiya under the Khalifa, and she built the very first university in Morocco. And that was actually the very first university, and she actually taught herself in that university. She taught science along with other various subjects were actually taught in the university. This is actually the very first university that was opened. It is in Fez in Morocco, and that's actually a real life picture of it. I've actually been there as well. So there is actually a video, but So earning is another one. So did you know that women are allowed to work and they are allowed to earn a living? Marriage in Islam, what's hers is hers and what's yours is hers as well, did you know? So tell me again how Islam gives women no rights. So did you know, even in the days of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his wife was a very successful businesswoman. He himself gave permission to a female physician and nurse to help wounded soldiers on the battlefield. Muslim women have the right to earn and keep their own money. That is actually an Islamic right. Islam was the first religion to give women the right to personal ownership of property and wealth. This right does not change when she marries. For the first time in history, women were granted economic independence in Islam. The money they bring into marriage is theirs, as well as the money they earn. So this basically stops men using rich women or marrying them for their money, which is exactly what was happening prior to Islam. That was one of the things, women were being used for their money, and once they got the money off them, then they would get rid of them and move on to other women. But this actually in Islam allows women to be treated with respect, because a man can marry her for her money. She can be a millionaire, but she doesn't need to pay not a penny to her husband and can keep it all to herself, and that stops men then using her. Did you know that in the UK, it wasn't until the early 20th century, after many years of struggle during the women's rights movement, that married women were able to actually exercise separate rights over their earnings, and everything, did you know, prior to that went automatically to their husbands, whatever they earned. So that's how the law was actually in this country. In Islam, a woman has no financial obligation and the economical responsibility lies on the shoulders of the man. Before a woman is married, it is the duty of the father or brother to look after the lodging, boarding, clothing, and other financial requirements of the woman. And after she is married, it is the duty of the husband or the son. Islam holds the man financially responsible for fulfilling the needs of his family, and that is actually elevating women. In Islam, the right of a wife is maintenance. Despite any wealth she may have, her husband is obligated to provide her with food, shelter, and clothing. So no matter how rich she is, she can keep all her money, and husband's duty is still to provide maintenance. Qawam is actually on men, the right of maintenance. That is the word used in the Quran. This mostly relates to children, as each child needs approximately 12 years before it is on its own. A child does not move into independence immediately. So for the first few years, it's almost completely at the mercy of the parents. Men in Islam have to afford women the ability to maintain children. This is rooted in the tradition of what is best from Allah. So even before people argue, well, I don't believe that Muslims must be committed to these rules, this was already actually defined by Allah. Okay, and did you know that Islam was the first religion to introduce inheritance, where women inherited property from their parents and husbands? Before that, in every religion, it was only men who inherited property, and women could not even dispose of any property without their husband's consent in the UK. It wasn't until the 20th century, after many years of struggle, after the women's rights movements, that married women were given separate rights over their property and inheritance. In all religions, women couldn't dispose of any property without their husband's consent. And in the Quran, it actually says for men is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave, and for women is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave. And be it little or much, it's an obligatory share. And that is actually in the Surah Nisa, which is actually a chapter of the Quran named exclusively to women. Nisa means women, and that is another very, very big thing in Islam, where there's a whole chapter dedicated to women. So inheritance, own and sell property is another one. Again, in the UK, it wasn't until the 20th century, to many years of struggle during the women's rights movements, that married women were given separate rights over their inheritance and property. They are also in Islam allowed the Islamic will, and similar to inheritance, Islam was the first religion to give women the rights to a final will. Did you know that in the UK this finally happened in the early 20th century, nearly only 100 years ago? In all religions, women could not even make a will as well. Inheritance. Allah commands you as regards your children's inheritance, male and that's in Quran Surah Nisa. This is again to do with legality. You know, I was just going to cover why it's a one-man witness against two female witnesses, and get two witnesses of your own men, and if they are not two men, then a man and two women, such as you choose for witnesses. And this is actually to do with financial transactions or murder, because men are, according to Islam, the financial supporters, so they are very, very good at money and business. Everybody knows nationally that men are better at maths. So in terms of that, and also in terms of murder, women are more emotionally unstable. They will cry more, they will get more anxiety. Men are more stable. So it's only in terms of those two types of transactions, so that if one of them errs, the other can remind her. So that actually also shows that women may forget. Everybody knows that there is a fluctuation of hormones in females throughout her cycle, and when the fluctuations of hormones occur, she gets forgetful. Did you know even a woman, while she's going through her menopause, while she has all the fluctuations of hormones and they go up and down, she gets forgetful. So this is actually something which Allah has highlighted, who has made us. So He knows best, really. He's our creator. He knows what our habits are like. So there's that as well. And also we get a lot more emotionally disturbed, especially when it comes to murders. You know, you just got to look at men and women and see who is scared of spiders. It's always the woman who gets the man then to come and help her, or if she sees a mouse. And all of these things are actually very, very relevant. So a man would be emotionally more stronger to cope with as a murder witness than a woman who we need to. And with anxiety, they may forget, as well as with the hormones as well. So also we already know that men are very, very good at maths, because they are tuned in by Allah to be the financial providers. They are the ones that earn a living, so they're good at maths. So this verse actually in the Quran refers to two types of transactions: financial transactions, and also in terms of being a witness for a murder. And this is all in a court of law. Now, voting is another one to do with Parliament and legal services. So did you know that in Islam, 1400 years ago, women were allowed to vote for a leader? So we know that, for example, when Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, passed away, women were actually allowed to vote for the next Khalifa as well. Now in the West, when we look at the Women's Act had to take place, because women wanted equal rights to vote and inherit property. Women were only given their rights after much hardship in the 1800s, after the suffragette movement. But Islam had liberated women 1400 years ago. Did you know that in the UK, it wasn't actually until 1928 that the first woman was allowed to vote? And did you know, in America, which is such a supernatural country, very modern, ahead of its time, and Australia, the first woman was only allowed to vote in 1960s. Yet the media, they look at Islamic countries and they look at, well, how comes women aren't allowed to vote? It must be the religion. But it cannot be the religion, because it even tells you here, Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second Khalifa of Islam, started the modern welfare social security system 1400 years ago. And it was over 1400 years ago the first woman was allowed to vote. So this is again where parliamentary law is separate from Islamic law, and some of these countries are actually trying to oppress women because the parliamentary laws is all about gaining power, and they don't want women getting into parliament, just like in this country women were not allowed in parliament, you know, over 100 years ago, and the suffragette movement had to take place. So these are all man-made laws, but not laws that are governed by Allah in the, according to the Quran. So we move on now to marriage. Now, it's often said that women cannot choose their own husbands. Did you know Khadija chose her own husband? And that is an example to mankind where women are allowed to choose their own husbands. Forced marriages, did you know, are not allowed in Islam, yet people feel that this is an Islamic thing. Forced marriages actually came from other traditions where there was caste systems, and a very rich girl's parents would force her to marry into a rich husband's household. Even in Hinduism, a Brahma caste, which is the top caste, can only marry within a Brahma caste, which Gandhi tried to get rid of as well. That's actually not also part of the religion. So if we look at some countries, for example, like Pakistan and Bangladesh, they are examples. Pakistan and Bangladesh are actually neighboring countries of India, and India had the caste system in it. So some of that then fed into Muslim lands where they thought that was the religion, but it was actually culture. And did you know, even in this country, if we look at aristocratic times, Victorian times, or times when people owned lands, they forced their children to marry within aristocratic culture and within landowner families where they could keep their own land within their own families. Believe it or not, marrying cousins and things was very rife even in English culture. If you look at the royal family, they had arranged marriages. They were all arranged. And if somebody tried to not to marry within the culture, for example, everybody knows the story of Queen Elizabeth's uncle, who wanted to marry a divorced lady who was Catholic, American, and he had to leave the monarchy in order to marry her. The Queen's generation, they didn't accept her, Miss Simpson, I think her name was, and he had to leave the royal family, and the whole monarchy changed then to the Queen's father's family, who was not in line to the monarchy. It was actually his brother, the one who wanted to marry this lady. So it actually happened in this country as well. In Islam, it is not allowed. Forced marriages are invalid. And we do know that there was actually somebody who visited Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in his time, and said that she disliked the marriage and she wasn't asked before she got married. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he actually declared that marriage void. To stop this happening, did you know that in Islam, a woman is asked first, not the man, and she's asked 3 times just to make sure. She's asked 3 times. So if she says no on any of those 3 times, did you know the marriage does not go ahead in Islam? So it is very, very important to understand what the Islamic ruling is. Not only that, did you know her father is not allowed to ask her? Who asks her has to be somebody outside of the family, just in case there is a big thing about forcing her. Her father may have a gun behind her neck and say, marry him or else. And she may be scared of her father. So somebody from outside the family is usually the person who asks her, just to stop, you know, just in case it is a forced marriage. So there's another very, very important thing there. And a lot of the things, I mean, it's actually in the law now in this country about not being forced into marriage to save family honour. We've all heard about honour-based violence is all in the laws in this country. You know, the parliament in this country has recognised that these things can happen. Again, if they do happen, then they are not Islamic, they are man-made things being put into practice. Okay, and then once you get married, did you know that in Islam you have the right of keeping your maiden name? This is to show that you do not belong to the family of your in-laws. They do not own you, they can't boss you around. You're not only theirs now and that's it, you can't come back to your parents. Because did you know that was happening before Islam came, where women, once they were married off, they couldn't divorce and they couldn't come back to their family homes again. The parents said, we've got nothing to do with you. We can't even eat or drink from you anymore. And that is actually very wrong and is actually, again, cultural. This happens a lot again in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, where lots of Hindu cultural traditions are coming in as well from the India side. So by keeping your maiden name highlights a woman's distinct personality, and upon entering marriage, she's entitled to keep her maiden name. She does not need to change her surname into that of her husband's. In fact, it's actually preferred that she keeps her maiden surname, so her line of descent can be traced. And Khadija, did you know, even though she was married to such a big name like the Prophet, who wouldn't want to have his surname against their name? Did you know she actually kept Khuwailid, her dad's name, as her surname? So that is actually a legal right in Islam, that you can keep your father's name. It shows your genealogy and it shows you are your father's daughter, not anybody else's. Something else very interesting is that Muslim women have a right to a marriage gift. That was actually introduced in Islam because prior to Islam there was huge dowries that poor girls' parents had to give in order to get her married. So men would demand 100 camels. If you give us 100 camels, we will marry your daughter. And women were being abused and used with this. So in Islam, it's not the woman who gives the dowry, it's the man. And it's actually in the Quran, which is amazing because, again, this is happening in some cultural settings. So Muslim women have a right to marriage gift. The groom gives a gift to the bride. The concept of the groom giving to the bride stops him using her, which was happening pre-Islamically. Again, in some cultural settings, it's the other way around, where the bride or the bride's family are giving huge amounts of dowry to the groom's or groom's family. This is, again, culture, not religion, and it's happening mainly in the Asian subcontinent, where the concept has leaked into Islamic traditions. The concept of the groom giving to the bride stops him using her, and in the Quran, again, this is mentioned very clearly, that one of the rights a woman has is that the man, the groom, is the one who has to give that marital gift. And I have on that slide got the Quran perspective there. Did you know that a woman can demand how much she wants in a nikah-nama, which is the document, the legal document according to Islamic law, which you present at the time of nikah. And you can write in there, I want £10,000, otherwise I'm not marrying you. She can demand that from her husband. So I'm not saying to use and abuse the system either, though. I mean, that's just an example I'm giving you. But women need to be aware of that Islamic right that they have according to Islamic law, because a lot of people, they don't know that. And then afterwards, when they get divorced, they have no money to keep them going, and they have no finance for their children, and marriage can leave them financially destitute. So all of that we need to understand as well. When a man and a woman gets married, did you know it's the boy who pays for the wedding? So the nikah, which is from the girl's side, they are the ones who have to do a very simple nikah. It can be just in the house, 2 witnesses, etc., etc. But when it comes to the walima, which is the party which the boy has to do, it's supposed to be grand. Did you know that Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, for all his weddings had a walima, and he always had meat cooked, which was a big speciality in those days at those walimas. So they are supposed to pay for the wedding and pay for the grander part of the wedding, and have lavish food like meat at that wedding. Okay, the next one is a very, very big thing, which is always attacked. That Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's wife, Aisha, was very young, 9 years old, and he married her, and child abuse and all the rest. But did you know, according to the law in this country and other countries, you were allowed to marry young in those days? And according to Islam, if you think about it, in all religions, as soon as females start their monthly, it means that they are ready then to produce children, does it not? It means their bodies are physiological now, capable now to produce children. So my next video I'm going to play is to do with this big thing, big misconception about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, marrying a very, very young girl. And here we go.
People wonder and ask, did Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, marry a child? Was this a normal practice 1400 years ago? What was the wisdom behind it? According to authentic sources, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, married Aisha when she was 6 years old, and the marriage was consummated after she turned 9. However, it is important to understand things in their historical context. For instance, it would be silly to ask, what kind of milk did they drink 1400 years ago? Or to ask, what kind of engine they used to have back then? Therefore, one must understand that things 1400 years ago were very different from now. Time have changed, and so human have. 1400 years ago, it was very common for women to marry at a young age. It is a historical fact that girls from ages 9 to 14 were married off in Europe, Asia, Africa, and America. For example, St. Augustine, 350 AD, he married a 10-year-old. King Richard II, 1400 AD, he married a 7-year-old. Henry VIII, 1500 AD, he married a 6-year-old. Even in the Bible, it says, "But say for yourself every girl who have never slept with a man." According to Catholic Encyclopedia, Mary, the mother of Jesus, was 12 when she married 99-year-old Joseph. Before 1929, Church of England ministers could marry a 12-year-old in Britain. Before 1983, Catholic canon laws permitted priests to marry off brides at the age of 12. A lot of people are unaware in the United States, in the state of Delaware in the 1880, the minimum age for marriage was 7 years old, and in California it was 10 years. Even now, the marriage age for some states are 12 in Massachusetts, 13 in New Hampshire, and 14 in New York. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, those who refused his message tried every method and strategy to discredit him. They were always looking for opportunities to attack him, verbally or even physically. Some of this verbal abuse consisted of calling him magician or a soothsayer or crazy. However, they never thought to point out or objected to his marriage to Aisha. Why? Because this was the norm of society, meaning it was completely normal. With that said, did you know that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he had only one wife, Khadija, throughout the first 54 years of his life? Did you know that she was a widow? Did you know that she was 15 years older than him? He, peace be upon him, spent his entire youth with her. He was committed to her until after her death by keeping ties with her friends. What about Aisha? Was she a child when she agreed to marry Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? First, It's important to note that it is strictly prohibited in Islam to marry someone before the age of puberty. Note, the age of puberty varies throughout different times and different places. According to scientific references, girls might enter full-blown puberty anytime between the ages of 9 and 15. Also, the average temperature of the country is considered to be the chief factor with regard to menstruation and sexual puberty. So, was Aisha a child? No, she was not. So what about the wisdom behind this marriage? God always knows best. The marriage of Aisha was an instruction from God. Aisha narrated to us more than 2200 hadiths or sayings of Prophet Muhammad peace be upon him. Aisha was exceptionally intelligent, and since she married Prophet Muhammad peace be upon him at a young age, she was able to learn so much from him. She later played an important role as a teacher, expert, and interpreter of Islam. So there was so much wisdom behind this marriage. For those who do not know Prophet Muhammad peace be upon him, Prophet Muhammad peace be upon him did not come to seek worldly pleasures, but rather he warned us against them. His companions described him as a man of morality and said he was shyer than a virgin in her seclusion. When the believers asked him an awkward question, he would cover his face out of shyness. He taught us that each religion is known for a kind of morality, and the morality of Islam is shyness and modesty.
We'll move on now. Did you know that once somebody does get married, a girl, then it's up to the husband to maintain her pre-marriage standard of living? By that, what we mean is that it's the husband's responsibility to maintain that standard of living. So if she was living in a palace with her own boat, for example, before she got married, then if the husband has the means to do so, then he needs to keep up that status for her. One thing very important about driving is another classic example. According to the government in Saudi Arabia, women were not allowed to drive. And everybody attacked Islam. Oh, it's Islam. Islam doesn't allow women to drive. Muhammad's wife rode a camel on the same land where women can now drive cars on today. So don't confuse Saudi culture with prophetic tradition. So again, the law of the land doesn't mean that's the law, Islamic law. So that once now the parliament has said now women can drive, and all of a sudden then everyone realized it can't be Islam, because how comes women can drive now? Okay. So 1400 years ago, Islam gave women the right to own and dispose property and earning without any guardianship over her, to be educated and to go out to work, to choose their own husbands, to keep their own surnames, to inherit, and many more. And in the rest of the world, including Europe, women had no such rights. This is a slide about women, why men are allowed more than one wife, and it's their physiological nature, but it was the government law. Did you know in all the lands people could marry above 4 wives? Did you know even in England, Islam was the first religion to limit the number of wives. The Quran was the first book in the world that limited the number of wives that you can have. Did you know that before the Quran was revealed, there was no restriction on the number of wives permitted? It was actually fine to marry hundreds of wives. The Bible has no restriction on numbers, and there were many, many prophets in earlier times who had many, many wives. Solomon al-Islam was actually one of them. He had nearly 1,000 wives. And we know Ibrahim al-Islam actually also had at least 3 wives as well. There are so many things about rabbis in Israel who had so many wives as well. So did you know that it was actually the first time when Islam came that the Quran was actually gave a limit on the upper limit of wives you could have. But it also said, marry only one. Marry women of your choice, 2, 3, or 4, but if you fear you shall not be able to do justly with them, then marry only one. So it tells you to try and treat them equally. That's again in the same chapter, Surah Nisa, women, verse 3. Before the Quran was revealed, there was no upper limit for polygamy, and men had hundreds of wives. Islam puts an upper limit of 4 wives and only on the condition that he deals justly with them. In the same chapter, did you know it actually says you are never able to be fair and just between women? That's actually guiding you towards marrying one. Again, that is in verse 129 of the same chapter. Polyandry is not allowed in Islam, and there is a reason. Allah has created men and women equal, but with different capabilities, roles, and responsibilities. Because men and women are different physiologically and psychologically. They are equal, but not identical. If a man has more than one wife, the parents of the children born of such marriages can easily be identified. For example, the surname we already spoke about is taken from the father. A man is more polygamous by nature compared to women. We already know that they have 10 times more testosterone than women. Biologically, it is easier for a man to perform his duties as a husband despite having several wives. A woman in a similar position having several husbands will not find it possible to perform her duties as a wife. A woman undergoes several psychological and behavioral changes due to different phases of the menstrual cycle. And that's actually a very, very important one, which would stop her having more than one husband, because we all know that at certain times of our cycle, we cannot sleep with our husbands. It's prohibited while our menstrual cycle is on. So again, that would prove difficult as well. And a woman who has more than one husband will have several sexual partners at the same time and has a higher chance of acquiring sexually transmitted diseases, which can also be transmitted back to her husband. This isn't the case in a man having more than one wife. So a woman's mechanism is more different, it's internal, and because of that, more infections can breed in there, rather than a male person whose private parts are external. So we already know that women, for example, they suffer from more urine infections than men do. And this is for the same reason. So this is the reason why men are not allowed to marry 4 husbands. The reasons are that it is not required to achieve this balance. In fact, it will make it worse by decreasing available males in societies with more males than females. Moreover, issues could also arise in respect of who the biological father is of a child. Although this is not so much of an issue in current times with DNA tests. Divorce is another very, very important one. So Islam was actually, did you know, the first religion to allow divorce in difficult circumstances. Before Islam, divorce was not permitted. We know that Henry VIII had to change the religion and become head of the Church of England, to allow divorce for his wife. And there is actually 4 types of divorce which a woman is allowed to give in Islam, despite what you hear in the media. So these are all the 4 different types that you can read. Women do have the right to initiate a divorce in Islam. Women have the right to initiate a divorce, and that is actually opposite to what the media says. The media portrays that a woman cannot initiate a divorce. Did you know it's actually easier for a woman to initiate a divorce than it is for a man to initiate a divorce? So for a woman to initiate a divorce, there's no waiting period. With men, they have to go through 3 times where they have to say that they want to divorce the woman, but with intervals of 3 months and 10 days. With a woman, it is much, much more easier. So there are actually 4 types of divorce that a woman can initiate. By agreement between the husband and wife, both may say, okay, we are not compatible, let us part. The other one is by the unilateral will of the wife. If she mentions it in her marriage contract, which is the nikah, which I mentioned earlier on, that she has the right to give unilateral divorce, she can give it. It is called a divorce isma. Then there's the third type: if the husband ill-treats her or not, give her equal rights. He has the right to go to a qazi and nullify the marriage. That's called a nikah-e-fasq. The qazi may ask him to give the full or part of the meher. And then the fourth one is, even though the husband may be very good, the wife has got no complaints against him, but for personal reasons she does not like him, she can request the husband to divorce. That's called a khulla. So there's so many different types of divorce. And even once they are divorced, did you know that it is up to men to provide food, shelter and clothing for them? It's actually mentioned in the Quran about providing maintenance for divorced and widowed women by either their father or their brothers. So there is huge amount of things there for Muslim women. Then the other one is, are Muslim women oppressed because of the way they are dressed? Did you know that the Bible and the Torah also tells women to cover their head? And it is actually there. And if you look at the olden days, people did actually dress very, very modestly. It is to keep their chastity and to stop huge sins like fornication and adultery or rape happening, for example. So here are some pictures. Here are some Greek Orthodox women. We have got an olden days nun. We've got even Mother Teresa. You always see women of religion dressed modestly. And we mustn't forget Prophet Isa Islam's mum, Mother Mary, dressing modestly. So dressing modestly and head covering is a requirement from all the Abrahamic faiths, not just Islam. Muslim women dress in a way that is modest and dignified. The purpose of clothing is not only to protect oneself from physical elements, but also to protect oneself from immorality and pride. There is the Bible verse, which also tells you to cover your hair. Here are lots of different traditions. Islam, not only Islam, but lots of other traditions encourage women to dress modestly as well. By following the command of God, Muslim women are doing the exact same righteous thing as Christians and Jewish women, for example. So here is a whole selection of different religions dressed modestly. And by dressing modestly, Muslim women are following the word of God, who is being consistent throughout time. By following the command of God, Muslim women are doing the exact same thing as righteous Christian and Jewish women. So nowadays, the media, they attack, for example, a Muslim girl, that she's oppressed because she's wearing a hijab, but none can be covered from head to toe in order to devote herself to God. In 1916 in Vienna, Austria presented the king with his wife, which, as the queen was entirely covered only by the fact that it's the queen and not to be looked by any man. But this practice was originally started by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, 1400 years ago. On Allah's command to protect the dignity of women, every Muslim woman is considered as queen in Islam. According to the law of this land, women had to wear a hat when they went out, and they had to wear a hat to church. That was actually parliamentary law right up to 1960s. So when you saw women, this is the Queen's family, they always wore veils in public places like funerals and weddings. And here, as you can see through the generations, we've got the Queen's grandmother, fully covered head to toe, and then the Queen's mother is less modestly dressed, but more modestly dressed than the Queen. So as we are going down the generations, modesty is decreasing as religion is decreasing. But if you look at the Bible and you look at the Quran and you look at the Torah, all three say exactly the same thing. And this is actually a picture of women in this country where they are dressed just like Muslim women are. Here is a very interesting video which talks to us about how women dressed in the olden days in Britain.
what's fascinating is the girls' hair is all covered. So women do not show long hair. So you see the girls, the shawls are completely covering them, and you don't see their hair at all, you just see their faces. There's all this debate now about the hijab and about women covering their hair, and we forget that. We've lost that as part of our culture. That 100 years ago, you wouldn't walk out in the streets of Lancashire with your hair down.
FGM, again, it's in the government law. FGM is not allowed in Islam. Now, FGM, which is female genital mutilation, is a procedure done to stop fornication, which is forbidden in most religions. Now, this is not to be mixed up with female circumcision or male circumcision. Male circumcision, for starters, is actually a very strongly followed sunnah, which Ibrahim alayhi salam started, and we also know that Isa alayhi salam was also circumcised. And Muslims carry on that tradition, and it is recommended 7 days approximately a Muslim boy should also be circumcised. And it's very, very good for health reasons. Female circumcision is not a strongly followed sunnah, but it is there. There are hadiths to say that a female can be circumcised, and this is actually to help with diseases and also to help with increasing sexual desire. However, female genital mutilation actually comes under the mutilation category, and that is forbidden under law in this country. And that is actually a form of self-harming, and it is not in Islam to harm your body. And there are other ways to stop fornication. For example, dressing modesty. We've already covered hijab, speaking business-like to the opposite gender, separation of the genders, and that kind of stuff. There are so many other safer avenues which we can take in Islam that can help us with losing our virginity or stop desires, stimulating desires that can then in turn lead to the act, which is sexual, relationships with people. So that's why it is important to understand. And FGM is actually forbidden in this country, and it's actually in the law as well. Keeping virginity until marriage is actually in Islam as well. So education is needed more there. So that brings me up to the end of the talk, and I would like to open up the floor now to questions, which I'm sure you all have. Like I said, I'm only covering the ones to do with law today, but I could go on forever about all the different avenues which Islam takes to uphold a woman's status and elevate the status of women. Okay, right, questions.
Come, sister. We've reached the towards the end of the time that we've got allotted, and there are a number of questions. I don't know whether you wanted to try and take the questions, inshallah wa ta'ala.
Yes, I can do.
Okay, we've got about 7 questions. The first one is, why do we have so few women in leadership positions?
The question was why there's so few. I already answered that within the talk. There are mainly men in Parliament, in all the countries in the world, actually. And I have been to Parliament myself. I have spoken to Theresa May, and because there are mainly men there, they don't give the rights for women for voting and things like that, only very, very recently, because they want the power, unfortunately. They want the power to lead, and a lot of the parliamentary laws are all about greed and power, land and money, which is not Islamic. But there is nothing in the religion at all to say women cannot, be in Parliament. And they are very good decision makers as well.
The second question is, are there any countries today that uphold the Islamic values that you've mentioned?
there is not a single country which follows full Sharia law at the moment as we speak. In Saudi Arabia, some Sharia law is there, but not all. Like I said, I mentioned one of them about driving. You know, it was in the law that women can't drive, and that's not in the religion. So at the moment, a lot of parliament is separate from the religion of the land, and that's not the way it's supposed to be, actually. In this country, I mean, I've been to, for example, the London dungeons, and the laws that were written up about what happens when somebody murders or steals, they were all in line with Christian laws from the Bible. And our countries were like that in the olden days as well, but they have separated because a lot of Western culture has gone into our lands. Don't forget, all of the Islamic lands have all been invaded at some stage by the West. So a lot of the Western culture has now fed into our countries.
Okay, there are two questions on inheritance, both of them, I'll put them together. Basically, they're saying, why do women inherit less money than men?
Yes, now that was actually my slide. I'm going to put it on now to answer the question. We're talking about inheritance. Now, the reason is that men in Islam are the financial supporters, so they need the money to support the family. Whereas women, they do inherit part of that, but their husbands have to support them. So that is where the difference is. But they also have their own money as well. So don't forget, they also have their own money they're allowed to keep for themselves. So they're actually better off. Whereas with the man, whatever he inherits, may it be double, he has to spend that to feed his family and for the house and clothing for the wife, everything. His is the main financial obligation, and this is why he earns two parts of that inheritance, and the female inherits one because she doesn't need to be the financial supporter. That is the main reason.
Okay, I think the last question is really for the network. I don't know, Hawa, if you can have a look at that question, the last question that's on Slido. Other than that, those are all the questions. So I'll hand you back to Hawa at the moment.
Jazakallah khairan, and once again, thank you so much, Lady Sidra, and thank you so much. That was a really full and informative talk. Inshallah, we will share the link to the recording. I'll share it with you, Lady Sidra, and I'll also, inshallah, share it with our members. But thank you once again for coming to speak to us, for talking to us about such a controversial topic, and for going out of your way to share and dispel some of these misconceptions. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair for having me as well, and it was a pleasure to be.
Thank you so much. Okay, Jummah Mubarak to everyone, and thank you everyone for joining.
Assalamu alaikum.